Welcome to the Darkstream. I'm Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and Infogalactic News. So, the French election results have just been reported. The exact numbers are not known, but it looks like the globalist banker and political neophyte Macron has defeated Marine Le Pen of the Front National. Now, a lot of Trump and Brexit enthusiasts and so forth are going to be disappointed by this, but they shouldn't be. There's absolutely no reason to be disappointed whatsoever. In fact, this entire French election has been a massive, massive success for nationalists. Okay? Now, what you need to understand is that this was all predicted several years ago. Okay, I'm not just, sometimes people hop on, whenever you get the whenever somebody loses an election or something, you often see the cheerleaders hop on and they try to explain how it was really a win for Hillary or whatever. I'm not doing that at all, not in any sense of the word. And in fact, on my blog today, the most recent post is largely nothing but a quote of a previous post that I made back in 2015. And what I pointed out then, and what I'm pointing out to you now, is that it is going to take 2 electoral cycles for the European nationalists to come to power. The Sweden Democrats are not going to win this election cycle. The Geert Wilders in Holland did not win this election cycle, nor did I expect him to. This was the election cycle in which the nationalists first became competitive. It takes time for these things. Something that I pointed out, what I was trying to point out to Americans, to put it in perspective, they say, "Oh, look at what happened in Paris. Look what happened in Nice. How is it possible that the French are not turning to the nationalists immediately? France is doomed." Okay? What I would say is, how quickly did Americans turn towards the Trumpian quasi-nationalists? Remember, Trump is not as much of a nationalist as the European nationalists are. How quickly did the USA turn to Trump or some nationalist of that flavor? Pat Buchanan, Tom Tancredo, even Ron Paul. How quickly did Americans turn towards that after 9/11? It took 15 years. It took 3.5 election cycles. We don't count the 2-year House cycle. We work on the presidential cycle. So it took time for Americans to not only realize the danger, but actually realize that the danger of immigration and the danger of foreigners in their midst was enough of a problem that they were willing to go outside the mainstream. Okay, there's always political inertia. It always, you've got to be joking. Europe has a lot more time than the USA does. I mean, this is something that I keep, it stuns me that I have to keep pointing it out, but you have to understand that the European countries have stronger national identities, and they also have much smaller immigrant populations than the USA does. Moreover, their immigrant populations, for the most part, are not citizens. So, that's absolutely right. It took 700 years for the Spanish to complete the Reconquista after the time they first started getting invaded. So, now granted, history seems to have sped up a bit with technology. But no, just look, if you're an American, just shut the fuck up about Europe. You know nothing about it. You don't understand anything about it. And so, you know, it's very, very tiresome to hear people talking about how there's 8% Muslims in Europe. Europe is doomed. Meanwhile, they've got like 30% Mexicans and other Hispanics, and 13%. I mean, put it in this perspective: there are more blacks in the USA than there are Muslims in Europe, and there have been for decades. Does that mean that the U.S. is doomed to become a black-ruled country? Well, it's a little ironic considering that Obama was president. But the point is that if you're an American, you don't understand Europe at all. Trust me on this. I'm an American who moved to Europe 20 years ago. I don't even pretend to fully understand Italy, much less Europe in general. And so, the idea that any American can have an opinion that is relevant to Europe based on, an exchange program that they did at Oxford University 30 years ago, or having spent a week in Paris last year, is absolutely absurd. There's more to France than Paris. There's more to Italy than Rome. I mean, yeah, you do see a lot of terror attacks, but there's really not that many. Okay? I mean, it's terrible. It's unacceptable. It's horrific. And it's wrong, and it has to stop. But you have to understand at the same time that the problem that the U.S. is having with its Hispanic immigrants is vastly worse in terms of rapes and that sort of thing than it is in anywhere except for maybe Sweden. So, I can't say for sure that France will persevere. France is an unusual country. You have to understand that the idea, France had its own imperialist culture. Americans understand, for the most part, the British imperial culture. We have inherited it. We have the same sort of white man's burden. Our ideals are universal. Everyone really wants to be British. I mean, everybody really wants to be American at heart, and so forth. The French, remember, were also an imperialist power. There are vast expanses of Africa that speak French, and so they have this concept that if you are French-speaking, you are of French culture. Now, they will learn, they are in the process of learning that is false, but it takes them time to accept that, just as it's taking Americans a tremendously long time to understand that their civic nationalist ideals are bullshit. Okay? Most of you are probably still civic nationalists. Most of the people you know are civic nationalists because that is the American mythology. France has its own mythology. I don't know the right terms for it. I can't possibly explain it to you in a meaningful sort of detail. But basically, they legitimately believed in the 70s that Algeria was Francais. It was French. It was part of France. Now, obviously, there were a lot of Algerians who felt very much otherwise, which is why Algeria fought a war against them. A war, they considered it a war for independence. The French considered it a civil war. And so we're not talking about the founders. We're talking about France. Drop it. The problems that they're having, most of the Muslims that are in France, not most of them, but quite a few of them, and for many years most of them, were actually Algerians who had supported the idea that Algeria was France. And then they brought them to France because they were all going to get killed, or at least quite a few of them were likely to get killed by the Algerian, by those fighting for Algerian independence. And so, I mean, it was a perfectly reasonable thing to do. They felt a debt, and because it was fit with their French, this French universalism. And so that's why it's very hard for the French. Yes, Algerians are Muslims. That's why it's very hard for the French to understand or to accept, really, that those Algerians are not and will never be French in the sense of French history. They share a language, but they don't share a culture. And they certainly don't share a nation. And so that is the point that the French are struggling with. And that is why Macron won today. Now, it's also partly because Marine Le Pen is a somewhat, I think it wouldn't be too far to say a problematic candidate. She had a lot of baggage that she was carrying. And yet, she still did historically well. 35%, which is about the amount that they're estimating that she got, is actually a really strong result. And more importantly, neither the Conservative Party nor the Socialist Party, the two establishment parties, even got to the final. And so the new rules, the rules have been totally overturned. The rules have been completely changed, and now the political dividing line is nationalist versus globalist. The whole bifactional ruling party thing that they had going there has now been overturned. And so that is a massive and very significant step. Now, the other thing that's interesting is you have to remember that this is it's a parliamentary system. And so Macron has no support whatsoever. En Marche, or whatever is the En Marche, I think is the name of his party, they have no one at all in the parliament. Now, obviously, Macron is a creature of the globalists, he's a banker and so forth, and so he's going to have his allies on the conservative side, which, of course, is going to enrage the socialists. Remember, the French socialists tend, the more left you go in France, the more anti-EU they are. And so, so the key thing is, now obviously the details matter, the execution matters. I mean, if I were Marine Le Pen, I would step back. I would not run as the presidential candidate in the next election. Her niece, Marion, is a little bit on the young side, but she's very articulate, she's very attractive, and she doesn't have a lot of the same baggage. She's also a very committed Catholic, if I recall, and so she has the ability to make moral and religious appeals and appeals to historical Christendom in a way that Marine did not. And so it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. I don't know how it's going to shake out. Again, like I said, I don't pretend to understand French politics, but I do understand that you cannot possibly understand them from an American political perspective. It's a different system, it's got a different history, it's got a different culture, and so forth. That's a good question. How can we help other countries with elections if we don't understand the culture? Well, what we do is we identify the nationalist candidate and we support them. But, the important thing is to not walk in there telling people what to do. The important thing is to go in there and ask. I occasionally have contact with some of the folks in the Italian nationalist parties. I even know one guy in one of the Swiss nationalist parties. And so, sometimes they talk to me about things, but they don't talk to me about like strategy. They talk to me about, rhetoric, tactics, little details, things that are transcultural. That's where you can help them. Everybody needs money. Everybody needs press. Everybody needs maybe help Maybe they don't have experience with regards to various tactical details and stuff, and that's where help can be offered. But to return to my main point today, the main thing that I want to stress is that this is not a defeat for nationalism. This is not a problem. This is a good turnout. Okay, if Le Pen had gone out there and the Front National only got 5% of the vote, 10% of the vote, that would be a disaster. But when more than a third of the country is openly supporting nationalism, that is a huge and massive step forward, especially because you know that it is happening despite the gathering of all the globalist forces and all the media forces and all the elite forces and all the establishment forces against it. This is a battle that was never going to be won. You all saw my predictions about Trump. I said from the beginning that Trump was going to win. We had Trump slide shirts on sale before the election. We sold a ton of them the day of the election, the day after he won. How did I know he was going to win? Because it was relatively obvious to me that the mood of the American public was such that they were not going to accept Hillary Clinton. And Trump ran a sufficiently nationalist campaign that it gave him the victory. Now, Le Pen ran... no, I didn't read Scott Adams. In fact, Scott Adams actually said that Hillary was going to win. He actually changed his mind briefly after the whole pussy grabbing thing. I said at the time that didn't change anything and that Trump was still going to win. So, I mean, I appreciate Scott's perspective, but I said that Trump was going to win long before he did. And I stuck with it, you know. So, so anyhow, the point is, you never saw me say that Le Pen was going to win, did you? Because I never thought she would. But nationalist parties are going to start winning. Brexit was a nationalist vote. Trump was a nationalist vote. So, so all of this stuff is building. You know, one of the next things that we're going to see happen is that I think that one of the next countries to turn to the nationalists is going to be Sweden. Maybe they're not, I mean, I don't think they're going, you know, in a parliamentary system, it's a little tricky to win dominance, to win an outright majority in these parties. You know, a nationalist party basically needs to win an outright majority, unlike the mainstream parties, because the mainstream parties can always make allies with other parties. So, you know, but the important thing is that is to watch the trend. You know, don't worry too much about the one. No, it's silly to say that there's not going to be any elections in 2022. Again, I can tell you're an American by talking like that because, you know, migrants don't get voting rights in Europe the way that they do in the USA. You don't get citizenship in 5 years. It doesn't happen. And so, anyhow. And also, the other thing is that the migrants tend not to vote for the most part, even when they can. There's not a. Sometimes it makes a difference when it's on the cusp. Like, for example, in Scotland, if only people who were actually Scottish had voted, it would have voted for independence. But because all of the English resident in Scotland were permitted to vote, the independence vote narrowly failed. So, anyhow, so the first message is, don't be discouraged at all by the Front National's defeat in the final round of the French presidential election. It is a good sign. It's a positive sign. It's a step forward. The nationalist vote is twice as strong as it was before, and it is only going to continue to grow. Apparently, the second message that needs to be delivered is, if you're an American, stop thinking that you have any understanding of European politics, whatever. It's a different system, different cultures, different languages. Just don't express an opinion. Your opinion is ignorant. It doesn't matter how much you read the New York Times, how much you read the Wall Street Journal, how much you read other American blogs about it, they don't get it either. Okay? Not everybody is an American at heart. And so it's very important to, I mean, it's very frustrating to me at times listening to this stuff, simply because it's very obvious that it's kind of the equivalent of people, you know, when you ask people about television, you know, they're so influenced by television that if you ask them what percentage of people are gay, they'll tell you 1/3. You know, it's it's just totally wrong. I mean, if you know, you would think that 2/3 of all couples are interracial based on television, but they're not. You know, so anyhow, but I will say the contrary is also true. Europeans tend to think they understand the USA much better than they do just because they watch American television shows. And it's always kind of funny. You have to like sort of correct them and explain to them that, you know, the entire country is not New York, Los Angeles, and Miami. I mean, if you ask the average European, they will always, they literally think that New York, that California is the state next to New York, and below it is Florida. You know, so I mean, I've actually known Europeans who were planning to drive from New York City to Los Angeles. We're like, no, you can't do that. You know, it'll take you days and days. They're like, really? You know, so the point is that don't be disheartened, don't be discouraged. Yes, it would have been nice if the Front National had won, but they were never going to. So stay positive. Remember that the trend is with us, history is with us, and most importantly, the truth is with us. So there's nothing to be discouraged about, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.